How to Battle Dissociation in the Moment. I've got the exact books you need to read, the exact extracts that we're going to read together, and I'm going to help you win this war once and for all. But firstly, I need to change the philosophy and change your frame of understanding. I know that you want to stop dissociating. I know that you want to feel like you're in a body that you belong in, but we need to start on a basic first premise. Why are you dissociating? And might there be a reason for the dissociation? The fundamental question I want you to ask yourself, why don't I want to be here right now? And there's 3 lanes that you should really explore this question. Why don't I want to be here in this body? Why don't I want to be here in this room or this environment? And why don't I want to be here? This one's a bit more subtle, a bit more abstract, but why don't I want to be here in this identity? You've got a physical, somatic, body-based dissociation. You have an environmental dissociation, and you also have an egoic or mental level dissociation. It could be dissociating from persona, and actually you want to be more of your authentic self, or it could be dissociating from a wider ego complex. That's a bit more complex. We'll save it for a little bit later in the video. But there's 3 main lanes that I want you to consider if you want to overcome the dissociative floating outside of yourself. Spacing out. I could even do it even better than just that. That emptying right there, that emptying. If you don't know me personally, I suffered from dissociation for about 12 years chronically from the age of 10. It took me about 12 or 13 years to fix this, but from the age of 10, this lack of breathing, bit of anxiety, bit of nervousness, but it's mostly muted. That kind of feeling, that dissociative feeling, that's what we're coming to terms with today. I'm going to give you some practical solutions, and I will read these extracts. What I want to do to break down this concept into something where we go from battle to more diplomacy-based solutions to your inner work is to start with an extract from Donald Kalsched and his arguably magnum opus work, Trauma and the Soul, by Donald Kalsched. You need to pick this book up from your favorite secondhand bookseller. I know, it's a bit more expensive than most books, but I guarantee it's worth less than a single hour of therapy with Donald himself, so please do just make the investment. It is one of the best books on the science and the art of healing dissociation. And there's a fundamental sentence I want to bring to your attention before we go into the practical solution, which we will get into. It's a big topic. Quote from the book from Donald Kalsched. So, ironically, dissociative defenses save a vital core of the self while simultaneously losing it, brackets, or losing it partially. They preserve the seed by cutting it off from life in this world, at least for a time. And this is at the end of a long extract here. Maybe if I hold it up to the camera, you could pause the video and see this extract there on your own screen. Hopefully that comes up. I'm going to take it away in a few seconds. Dissociation is a life preservation strategy. Usually what happens for the dissociative individual is that they grew up in a family home, or they went through a moment in their adult life where they needed to escape the experience. Again, escape the experience of the body, the environment, or the mental identity, maybe all 3 of them, maybe 2 of them in unison together, but at the very least one of them. You needed to escape your body, or the environment, or the identity. Dissociation is a life-preserving mechanism, which Donald Kalsched goes into in more detail. It's having survival value. Finishing the quote now, and then we'll break it down. It's talking about shattering and devastation and that primal wound aspect of things. If you didn't dissociate, you'd be fundamentally wounded beyond repair, and this is where dissociation is actually something that we should be grateful for. It's an ally, and when that framework comes in, it's no longer I'm battling dissociation. It's understanding that a part of my psyche, or a part of my soul even, is trying to support me by keeping me safe from what I perceive to be an unworkable situation in body, environment, or identity. Kalsched's talking about the shattering and the original wounding of life experiences, but he says, fortunately, this shattering almost never happens, at least not completely. Instead, A life-saving split, I'll repeat that, a life-saving split occurs that we call dissociation. Dissociation seals over non-being. It prevents annihilation of the unit self, substituting multiplicity and an archetypal story that implicitly holds the parts together. Somewhat complex language, but it basically means that the individual, in most instances, retreats into a world of fantasy and mental projection and mental perception. What I mean by that is that you end up in a dream world of sorts, both at the inner level but also the identity level. I'm not going to go into the full science. Again, you will need to read this book for yourself. Just to keep this practical for this video, I want to begin the conversation today to help you overcome your dissociation, to understand that at the very least, if you get one thing from this video, your dissociation is here to help. It's here to help. Return back to that question from the beginning of the video. Why don't I want to be here right now? What is it about this moment in my work life, this moment in my romantic relationship, this moment in this social situation, this street that I'm walking down, that makes me dissociative, that makes me exit and escape and go somewhere? I used to call it the feeling of being the puppet master, having myself on strings, floating somewhere above and behind my head. That's how it felt for me for over a decade. All of my adolescence, that's exactly the feeling. Didn't actually inhabit my own heart. I wasn't here. I wasn't in a body that I wanted to be in. I was initially overweight and untrained and a gamer, dorky kind of character, and then progressively as I started drinking and smoking and doing drugs, it's not a nice place to be in. There was all kinds of trauma, all kinds of angst and anxiety. The family environment that I was in, I didn't find that a very good place to exist inside either. And then the wider context of my identity. If you've ever been a young man trying to piece it all together in a bit of a difficult childhood home, there's not many identity options available to you to give you a feeling of safety and success and aspiration and love and comfort and connection and compassion and creativity and all the things that we strive towards. There's not many opportunities to really stick that identity to anything in the literal environment or the literal body, so all three of them were missing. Therefore I had a triple stack against me, 3 strikes and I'm out of my own body, out of my own environment, and out of my own identity. That's what happened for me. But I realized, as I'm working through things, I bring a bit of my story into the video so it can be useful for you. Dissociation was my ally. It prevented a vital split. Some precious part of me went into the very back room of my corridor of the soul, all the way at the back, and it was always there, it was always preserved, it was always perfect and pristine. Some would call that the inner child, or for many people it appears as the inner child. Other times it can be the golden shadow, archetypal projections of the king or the queen, the wise old man, the wise old woman, maybe a spirit guide if you're more shamanic. Something like this. That's always there. This is all very well and good, I might hear you saying, Jordan, but I just want to know how to stop dissociation in the moment. Okay, I'll give you that practically in just one moment. We will go into Aligned, Relaxed, Resilient by Will Johnson. I'll bring you into some centering practices to help you get back into your flesh. But it is useless and a waste of your time. If you've already skipped forwards on the timestamps, you've missed me saying this anyway. I'm glad that you haven't. It is a waste of your time to symptomatically come back into centering if you haven't asked the deeper question of why don't I want to be here right now? Dissociation never happens without a causal chain of reasoning at either the conscious or unconscious level. For example, you're in a work meeting. Your boss starts saying something. You don't even know what they said. You were gone for a few minutes. Sorry, can you repeat that again, please? You were dissociated. You come back home, your partner's there, they start saying something else, you're cutting the vegetables or you're tidying away some clothes and you were gone again for a few more minutes. Where did you go and why did you go there? Let's focus on the why did you go there part. Is it the case that the environment or the relationship is actually unsafe for you? Or is it the case that there's something unsafe in the past, some kind of bruising or wounding or trauma, depending on the intensity? Some of that is here, lingering in the background, and you're overlaying it onto the current situation. That's for you to decide and discern. Do work with a professional if you need a bit of detachment. Not that you need any more detachment, let's be real. Let's imagine a bit of detachment from the personal life circumstance and decision-making aspect of where is this coming from. Get an external point of view, not your own external point of view, someone else's external point of view, and maybe you can pinpoint exactly what's happening. It's a great practical thing that you can do. most people who are suffering from chronic dissociation will struggle to get that sense of analytical and subjective emphasis on the wheres and the whys and the wherefroms on their own, because they're a bit too diffused and a bit too dispersed. But the fundamental principle, there's probably something in the environment, at the very least, that whiffs of danger. It might not be a strong smell. You might not need to cover your mouth, and it might not be so obvious that it's blinding you and you need to cover it all up. It's not too much. Obviously, if it was that bad, you wouldn't be in a circumstance to begin with. But if there's a whiff of danger, you've got a vague impression that you've smelt this before, no wonder you preventatively dissociate. You're not going to win that battle of dissociating because the dissociative aspect of your identity or the survival structure at a biochemical, bioneurological, psychosomatic, whatever it might be, you choose the language that works for you. Something's happening that's helping you to leave the body to prevent what could be perceived as a splitting or a shattering moment where there's an actual wound to the body or a wound to the identity. Don't battle it. There's a reason for it. If it's not in the body, physically unhealthy, physically addicted to substances, physically sick, maybe whatever particular sickness that might be. That could be a good reason why you're dissociative, of course. How do I fix this? Well, I'll come to that maybe in a moment. And of course, these are deep issues, so it can't be fixed from a single YouTube video. Maybe there's a body-based issue with how you've been misusing how you've been abusing yourself and mistreating yourself. That could be a literal case. The environment could likewise be abusing you or hurting you in one way or another. You need to remove yourself from the situation. Or you've yet to properly clarify and recontextualize and then become to integrate the next stage of your adult identity. You might be caught up on some hangovers identity-wise, some egoic ideas of who you may or may not be based on stories from 10 or 20 years ago. The identity level dissociation is one of the hardest things to speak towards, but that battle against the dissociative moment can not only never be won because you need to shift from a warring mentality to a diplomacy mentality. If your identity of self, if your frame of self is not yet properly scaffolded, or a proper tree trunk that can be wrapped around with vines and eventually will bring fruits and sturdy in the roots, that's where we're going in the next half of the video. If it's not yet there, there's a desperation that comes up in me as I say it because I can't articulate. I'll do this. Break the fourth wall. Break the fourth wall. I'm struggling to articulate on this point because if I plant a certain seed inside of you as a more dissociative individual, and that goes into your unconscious at a bit more of a, you're more vulnerable to these kinds of seeding moments because you're a bit less structured, a bit less solidified. If I say something that's maybe you're like this, maybe you're like that, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that, you might float towards that idea and it's not even your idea in the first place. I'm not saying you should be this, you need to be that, you shouldn't be this, you better not be that. It's up to you. It's your life. You get to decide the man or woman that you are going to be and what's appropriate for this next year of your life, the next 10 years, and ultimately looking back on your final day. Who do you want to have become? And how do you want to have lived and to have loved and to have created and explored and shared and felt? That's your story to write in your mind. You're already good at disconnecting off into the mental fantasy realm. You're good at making up stories. You had to make up some pretty good stories when you were younger to probably get you to this situation where you were safe enough to get through it all. Use that story-making capacity to give you a new mental identity. You get to choose. Just make sure it's your own authentic choice. We'll move into the second half of the video. Some practical tips. If you skipped straight through on the timestamps, this is a practical tip of how to beat dissociation, but I do recommend that you watch the first half of this video because I gave you some pretty valuable philosophical guidance that will actually change your interpretation of this second half of the video. I'm bringing out Aligned, Relaxed, Resilient by Will Johnson. And specifically, I want to bring this conversation into a whole different perspective, which is the somatic perspective. A bit of somatic psychology, a bit of bioenergetics, and it seems completely unrelated until we start to piece together the mind-body problem as it relates to dissociation. Fundamentally, what I'm going to be inviting you to do is, in the moment of dissociation, where you realize you've spaced out with your boss, you realize you spaced out driving the car, whatever it might be, we're going to practice centering. But centering is a word which means many things, but I want you to have the feeling of centering as the fundamental image that brings you back from the dissociative moment. Image being the key word. We'll start at the fantasy and the imaginal and the visual aspect of things, and then we'll bring it into the somatic. People will say things like, this is the reason I'm doing this, why are we starting with image if we're trying to get to body? Why are we starting at the mental and then coming down into the physical? That makes no sense. I'm already dissociative. Surely I should just focus on my breath. Surely I should do what's recommended of what's one thing that I can see? What are two things that I can touch? What are three things the environmental classic anti-dissociation, breathe, come down into the body, all this stuff. Yes, it works, but we're missing a stage, we're missing a reason, we're missing a story and a narrative, a series of images, a symbolism, a rich texture of mental play before we come back into the physical. So that's where we're going to start. And yet, paradoxically, we're going to start here with this extract about the body orientation so that we have an anchor physically to then ultimately turn to. Complex language, doing a more advanced video on how to beat dissociation and how to ultimately get back into center. I spent 12 or 13 years suffering from this. I don't dissociate the same way I used to anymore. This works. Will Johnson calls our attention towards the natural leaning of the body and the various dissociations or overcompensations and undercompensations of the physical form. As I'm reading these words, pay attention to the connection with dissociation, and pay attention specifically to what's happening with psychic energy as it relates to the body in motion in one way or another. Will Johnson, quoting from the book, he says, "Bodies can also lean too far back or too far forward. A body that leans habitually backward will create a mind that lags behind the present moment, preferring instead to content itself with mulling over events in the past. The tensions required to keep it erect will cause it to miss the richness of the present moment. A body that leans too far forward is constantly ahead of itself, and may find its mind constantly thinking ahead to events in the future. It too will miss the doorway of the present moment that could lead it to a fulfillment that no amount of planning for the future can come close to achieving." Interesting, right? You can dissociate into the past or dissociate into the future. To let go of what is past and what is not yet, to align themselves with and live fully in the present moment, practitioners of mindfulness will want to bring alignment into the structure of their bodies. Bit of a complexity here, but hopefully, still easy to follow through. When you're dissociating, which direction do you dissociate in? All the way back to the memories of the past, all the way forwards to the anticipations of the future. I used to be a lot more like this. Now I'm a little bit more like this. Sometimes I go side to side. That's a question for you to answer for yourself. I'll continue with a few more extracts again from this very, very readable, highly recommended book, one of my core curriculum books. It's about alignment, and alignment leads into centering. If we can align the greater mass of our body around a predominantly vertical axis, then the force of gravity will support us and the body will feel buoyed up. Just bear with me if this seems too out there. I will weave it together. If we discard our understanding of this simple principle and allow the various segments of our bodies to move away from this predominantly vertical relationship, we will need to exert constant muscular tension to offset what we now experience as a destructive downwards pull of gravity. Constant physical energy, constant psychic energy, it's similar. It's not necessarily the same thing, but for the sake of this conversation, they might as well be closely related. Final extract from the book, and then I'll weave it all together. Alignment is created in our bodies through making sure that each and every major segment of our bodies, brackets, our head, neck, shoulders, torso, pelvis, upper legs, lower legs, and feet. If you can't remember all those, just go for head, shoulders, knees and toes, which is important to emphasize because most people who are dissociative only go for their heads and their shoulders, but they forget the knees and toes, which is why you have to re-emphasize. And of course, eventually you just go head, shoulders, It's interesting, right? Interesting that the nursery rhyme dissociates us, primarily focusing on the head. In the children's nursery rhyme, we go head, shoulders, knees and toes, and then eventually you go head, shoulders, ba ba ba. It's silenced, and then head, right? And then eventually they just point to their body parts, but they progressively silence themselves as they go down the somatic chain. Fascinating. I wonder what the conditioning might be. Why do we identify that the head is the top, the head is the one, the head is the final thing that goes, as of course where the sense of identity might be. Bit of nursery rhyme play to bring in as a random abstraction. Alignment in the body, alignment in the heart, alignment all the way down. If any of these segments strays too far away from the imaginary vertical axis around which we can organize the fleshy tissues of our body, then we unwittingly expose an unsupported mass to the downwards pull of gravity. We then have to offset the pull through tensing the muscles and constant contraction, etc., etc. Structural alignment is needed so that the body can support itself. Read this book if you want to go deeper into it. I'm really trying to bring in a wide, holistic psychology perspective of how to stop dissociation. You see that idea of the vertical axis being repeated in Will Johnson's work. The vertical axis, from my opinion, could be seen as many different experiences. For me personally, the one classic image that I like to go with is a strong and sturdy pine tree. No surprises for the long-time viewers of this channel. What does it mean to be a sturdy pine? Well, the sturdy pine, of course, has a base of very, very, very well chosen, very intricately webbed, and very strong and reliable roots. The roots go deep with a strong and sturdy pine, and the thick trunk goes all the way up. It's hardy, it's resilient, it's robust. The trunk goes a certain way up, and then the branches come out, and eventually the evergreen fronds will emerge from the pine. And you go as high as you please. Pine trees can grow very, very tall, especially if you think of maybe the massive redwoods out in California, for example, some of the oldest, tallest trees in the world. They're from the pine species. They're fantastically ancient, archetypically potent trees. Why am I mentioning this on a video about beating dissociation? It's because I want you to work with the image of being a strong and stable tree. It seems silly, but start with the image. In the dissociative moment, where do you imagine yourself to be? If you were a tree, where do you imagine yourself to be? For most people, myself included, in a moment of dissociation, I am never the roots. I am almost never the trunk. I might be along a branch, and maybe a branch extending all the way out to the side, or maybe over on this side. Maybe I'm a branch going all the way behind me, or a branch going all the way ahead. But quite often, I'm somewhere up on the pinnacle of the tree, and I'm being swayed around by the wind. Like the pine tree that I am not the lower baseline feeling of identity. It seems ridiculous. Why am I talking about this? In the dissociative moment, you have left the body and the environment and the identity to some degree, and you are in a realm of mental fantasy energy, as it were. Mental fantasy imagery. Go into the image of the pine tree. Where am I as the pine tree? Again, for most people, they're at the top. The centering principle is to drop down the trunk, to drop all the way down that central trunk and send a plumb line, an anchor as it were, to the middle of your root network. You're no longer a tree. Think of this in your human body. If you imagine the chakra system from root to crown, something that some people really enjoy mapping their inner experiences onto, that crown feeling of opening up out here and the roots also coming out. Have you ever seen these energetic diagrams? It's the Taurus-like infinity symbol. The crown goes out, the root goes out. You've got a straight line going all the way through. You also have a tube. If you're looking at the biological nature of human beings, you are a tube from mouth to anus, and you've got a tubular system going all the way through you. There's a flow of energy. There's veins and arteries. If you ever look at the nature of the lungs, for example, like a cross-section, you can see all kinds of references to nature. Blood vessels as well. Leaves and trees and branches. We are very, very interwoven with nature. In the dissociative moment, you are normally, almost always, a tree that has overly swayed back. The wind has hit you back. You're avoiding something, or you're going into something, or you're all the way out on the edge of the branches. When you have noticed that you've dissociated, I will bring myself back to center. What I feel as I focus on that, it's not perfect because I'm on a video, I feel, quite literally, more presence, as strange as it is to say, there's more presence and consciousness in my buttocks. Right there between the cheeks. Right there at the base. I can almost reach up and grab myself and give myself a firm and loving squeeze. Right there. Boom! My roots, my root. That's where I drop my conscious to. And what happens is that the overcompensation creates an equilibrium. Again, might call it all woo-woo. I'm making it a YouTube video. If you want to go into all the scientific terminology of what's happening in the nervous system, read this book. I'm giving something that's subjectively appropriate for someone who's more imaginal and more dissociative. What happens for me when I bring myself down and then I drop all the way down and I have that feeling of grabbing myself between the cheeks, right there in the root. Again, not hurting myself, but just presence, like I felt, here I am. You lift yourself up, and that buoyancy feeling that Will Johnson described in that extract, that downward pull of gravity, then allows for an upwards feeling of buoyancy. That reverses the dissociative escape from the self and from the environment. Settle. Gather with the breath, settle with the exhale. It works. You can also spread open your feet, of course, standing up and going for a barefoot walk. That really helps if you are dissociative to literally come back and settle in along the spine. If you've ever had chiropractic work or osteopathic work, that will help you to have a generally nicely aligned spinal pattern so that you're not all the way off. I don't know if you can see it on camera. There are many things that you can do. Just let that imagery work for you. A few more prompts that might work. Bring yourself back to the roots. If you imagine yourself as a tree, energetically in that imaginal realm, you don't even need to rush towards being a human. See, I'm playing some games. Why is Jordan talking about trees? Why am I telling you to be a pine tree when you've gone through difficult life experiences? It's because if you've got enough repeated negative impression of being a human being, maybe it's a little bit easier to pretend that you're a fucking tree. Maybe. It's not my story that I've adopted the whole way through. It's not the reason I use pine trees and pine tree emojis. I'm just playing with the energy a little bit. People sometimes imagine that there are all kinds of spiritual identities or different kinds of animals. It's a safer step from the soul to the human to have something intermediary, so it doesn't feel so high stakes. You're not coming back into your body if you've got years or decades of negative experience about being in your body. You're not trying to flood in and rush in and, okay, I need to heal my dissociation. I'm going to get back in. The stage in between, the imaginal stage. You could be a tree. You could be a different type of animal. You could be whatever you want to be. Just a mental image for that 10 seconds, 60 seconds to bridge the gap between the unlivable moment and the safe dissociative capsule. You find somewhere to bridge in, and eventually that root network feeling, or being a strong bear or a strong elephant on sturdy paws, a heavy, hefty mass, hundreds of kilograms, maybe more. Maybe you're a whale in the ocean. Weight, gravity, presence, posture. Center yourself on the vertical axis. Feel that line almost as if it were a pulsating beam inside of you, like there were a rod of light that's twirling around itself like an axle, and that's in you, and it's going all the way up, and it could be very thin or very thick, depends upon your inner experience of your own auric presence, as it were. That's how you come back into center. Everything else is a technique to get you towards that outcome. People might describe it in different language or more scientific language about the nervous system and various fight, flight, fawn, freeze responses. That's all fine. We can talk about that another day. For the actual imaginal subjective experience, if you have left your body, your environment, and your identity, and you're somewhere out here, find your way back into center, and the center runs all the way from the crown to the floor, all the way through, of course, the root, but also don't forget about your legs, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. It's interesting that we go from head to shoulders. We skip out all of the chest and the midsection and the hips as well, and we go straight to knees and toes. Why do we go straight to knees and toes? Maybe it's just a nursery rhyme. Maybe it doesn't mean that much, but many people lose a sense of identity. Interestingly, this is where most people's problems are. They can kind of connect to their heart, but then just below their heart into their guts and then into their genital region up until about their knees. That's where most bodily distortions fester. People get gut issues, people get genital issues or overcharges, lustful things, for example, or underly potent charges, all kinds of digestive problems as well. All kinds of things happening with the lower back. Interesting, right? Head, shoulders, knees and toes. Fill out the middle of your trunk as well. Practical next step for this very practical video. I'm sure it's very easy, very step A, step B, step C. It's definitely not, but I'm trying to give you something that really changes your perspective of dissociation. If you found yourself in the center, the thing that you need to maintain, as Will Johnson said in Aligned, Relaxed, Resilient, is watch out for the forwards lean or the backwards lean or the side to side. If you are centered and your centering is fundamentally leaning all the way forwards and out, you'll eventually be exerting a lot of energy. And the same this way. As I lean back, my torso, I went up onto my toes just there. I had to really brace my core to bring myself back down. The same on the side to side. What you might need to do practically is if you do dissociate, don't try and move. Just sit still or stand still. Curl your feet into the floor, ideally if you're barefoot or in socks. Twist in. Lock in. Center all the way through. And then once you've centered, even if this takes 2 or 3 minutes, if you have the possibility to do this, then take a conscious step. Then you step into the next activity, or you step back to review something that's a traumatic memory of the past. Don't rush into it. Give yourself that extra gift of a few more minutes. I've been dissociative. I just dissociated for like 3 minutes. I guess I'll center for 3 more minutes then. No judgment. It's not a battle. I'm just going to get back to center. Arms dropped. Down the trunk into the root. Grab myself between the cheeks in my mental grasp of my identity. Right there. Boom. And then, with that clarity of mind, I will move into the next activity of the day. Again, ideal scenario. If you've only got 10 seconds, imagine the scene in your mind. Imagine coming back in. 2 or 3 breaths. Okay, I will come back to this later. A little promise that you can give yourself, a little pledge to the inner listener within. I'm going to contain this issue to address later on this evening with my journal. It's not repression. Huge difference between repression and containment. Repression is suppression, is distance, is rejection. Containment is to store something for later on with the intention of rediscovering and unpacking that material in better conditions. Contain the moment itself. Reflect later on why it caused you to dissociate. Maybe why something else in the past reminds you of that, or why it's repeating and flashing back. Sure, that could be the case for your own work later that evening or later in that week. You can separate out things. I hope this has helped. I really do hope this has helped. I've done a little bit more of a creative risk with this video. I run the risk in the comment section. People are going to be really misunderstanding what I'm trying to do here, or they'll think that I have no idea about the science and the terminology and all of the nervous system aspects of what's happening. You can go read the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual and Google the definition of dissociation, look for the psychoanalytic, psychiatric approach if you want to. That's not what I'm trying to do with this particular video. You can read Trauma and the Soul by Donald Kalsched. You can go and study somatic psychology in more detail. What I'm trying to do, as someone who has lived through over a decade of deep dissociation and has found my way out of that floaty, dissociative, always above and behind myself, I am the puppet on my own strings kind of experience, I'm trying to give you something that actually works, which is to not go straight back into a body that didn't feel like it was your body or like a place you want to exist inside, but to build a bridge with something imaginal. For me, I go with the tree metaphor. For you, it might be a certain animal or a spiritual persona, spiritual self that helps you to feel safe and solid and grounded. That's what will work. I hope. It worked for me. I've seen it work for some clients. If you're looking for more help on this, you might find some guidance and some holistic psychology in either the comments section or the next video. I'm answering questions every single week. We are back on YouTube, and here is the next one. Thank you for being here, and good luck.